First thing we're going to do is setting up the serial driver. You have to have your USB cable in the PC without holding the reset button before installing that driver. So these are some key issues. You might want to take a screenshot of this right now so you can see the major steps. Step 2, with the USB cable still in your PC, okay, check Device Manager once you've installed the serial driver to make sure there's a COM port associated with the Freedom K64. And as one person mentioned before, is that Windows will try and block everything you do. So you have to watch and make sure that when your computer catches up, especially if it's a slower computer, that you say allow, because Windows will try and block anything that you're trying to do because it's not a Microsoft product that you're trying to install. So these are some very key issues to make sure that you make sure that Windows is not blocking things from happening, because if it does and you don't say allow, then drivers and stuff will not get loaded and things will not happen. Now, step 3 is once you've done the device driver without holding down the reset of the Freedom K64, step 3 says now you do. You hold down the reset, put it in, and then drag and drop the bin file for DAP link into, it'll either show up as either a bootloader or maintenance, one of the two. Now, when you do drag and drop it in, you're going to see the green LED nearest the reset button will flash. And after about 30 seconds or so, you should remove the cable and put it back in, but this time not holding down the reset, and you should see DAP link showing up in the File Explorer. Part 5, at this point, you should be able to set up PuTTY, and there's stuff in the announcements to show you how to do that. But for Lab Quiz 3, and we're not using the PuTTY stuff, but you should have it set up. Most of it has to do with LEDs and stuff. For Lab 3 quiz. Step 6, get the latest version of MCU Expresso, download and install it. Once you've downloaded and installed it, you have to make sure again that Windows is not blocking drivers being put in, because if it does, it won't work properly. Then after you've got that, you have to download the Freedom K64 SDK and drag and drop it into the installed SDKs. I'll be demonstrating that. Only export to MCU Expresso projects using the classes version of the embed library from embed. If you try the other one, it's going to give you errors. Number 9, make sure that before you input any archive or .zip file into MCU Expresso, which you should have set to the downloads directory, they don't have parentheses. Because anything with a parenthesis in it, like if you export it one time, it's just the file name. You export it again, it'll say the same thing, bracket 1, bracket. It can't handle the bracket 1 or the bracket 2 brackets. Anything in parentheses, it will not be able to handle in MCU Expresso. And if that happens, what you do is you just go into the downloads directory, get rid of the original one, and just change the one with brackets to be one without brackets, and you should have no problem. And when you get it into MCU Expresso, of the two projects, there's a copy at the bottom and the one at the top. Open up the top one only, click on the CPP file, and then hit the big blue button, and everything should just work. This is the theory. So I'm going to go through step by step, step 1 through 10, and make sure that you can get an idea of what should happen when you've got this stuff set up. If you have set up the serial driver, then you should see ports, bracket, COM, and LPT showing up in Device Manager, and you should see embed serial port and whichever COM port you have. This one happens to be COM3, yours will be probably something different. Now, if you're in Device Manager and you happen to pull out the USB cable, in a few seconds it will up and these will disappear. And if you put it back in a few seconds or so, it will reappear. So only when the cable's in will the serial driver be there, and that's why you have to have the cable in when you install the serial driver. If the cable's not in, it'll say serial driver installed, but it will not associate a COM port with your Freedom K64 unless the cable's in when you install it. Now you can notice up here also that we've got Simsys DAP, because that was installed as part of those 10 steps that I mentioned. And under Embed, you want to first of all go to Hardware and Boards. And under Hardware and Boards, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to come up. We're going to choose Pelion Device Ready is the Freedom K64, not the K66, the Freedom K64. You have to be very specific. There is a Freedom K66F and a Freedom K64F. This is the one that we want. And what you're going to see is this menu showing up here. And the two things we need is Part 6 for PC configuration and Part 7 to do the actual DAP link. So we go to PC configuration here. You're going to click on this screen here, and it's going to say download the latest driver. Click on it to install it, and you better make sure that the cable is in at this point, or else this interaction won't happen later, okay? So when you download the latest driver, we'll click on that, save it somewhere, and then wherever you save it, you just, probably to downloads, just double click on it, run the driver with your cable in, everything should go fine. So the other thing we want to do is the firmware update, which is number 7. So if we click on this, step-by-step firmware upgrade instructions, we click on that. And under here, you're going to choose Windows because that's what you've got running. And then you're going to click on here. Now again, when you click on here, it's going to allow you to save file. When you save file, put it in your downloads directory, and then because it's a bin file, you cannot open it. The only thing you can do is drag and drop it into your bootloader, okay? And the way you get the bootloader is, again, holding down the reset as you push your cable in, and then you take a look at this file that you've saved to your downloads and drag and drop it in loader, and after about 30 seconds of the green light flashing, disconnect and reconnect your USB without hitting the reset, and everything should go fine. Once you've done that, this is what you should see. Now if I pull out the cable, it usually will disappear from here like it will in Device Manager, and when you put back in the cable, it will then reappear. So as long as the cable stays in, it should stay here and it should not disappear. These are the things that you should see. So there's DAP-Link showing up again. So DAP-Link should work, and the only way it's going to disappear is 2 ways: pulling out the cable, or when you slide a bin file from any of your projects that you've got into DAP-Link, it will disappear and the green light will be flashing beside the reset as it's downloading, and when the download is complete, DAP-Link will show up again so that you can download something else. And the thing is, when you drag and drop a bin file after you've got all this setup done, it will automatically launch the application once DAP-Link reappears and the green light goes out. So right now we've dealt with step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, doing the hello world and all this kind of stuff and typing in characters. PuTTY settings, so you can click on this link. You have to, under terminal, set implicit carriage return in every low feed. You also have to have force on for local echo. These are the most important things that you should have. There's other things in here that you should check with your PuTTY screen. But if you don't have your serial driver loaded and you don't see that stuff that I showed you on Windows Device Manager, if you don't see that it's got a COM port, and that's a COM port that you're going to set up in here. The other thing that we're going to need for next week is CP437 set up under translation here. You can click on this link and test out once you've got the serial driver loaded, and once you've got DAP-Link working, you can click on the link to import into compiler, and then get the bin file and draw back into DAP-Link. And again, the green light will flash, DAP-Link will disappear, DAP-Link will come back when the green light goes out, and your application will be running at that point. So that's PuTTY. Make sure you get the latest version of MCU Expresso and download and install it, okay? Now this is what one person said, that it won't install the driver if you do not check with Windows when it says it's blocking something. You have to allow it. If you don't allow it, the drivers don't go down and you'll have lots of problems getting MCU Expresso working. Same with any kind of download of software that's not Microsoft, it's going to block. So from Lab 3, I think it was, Part 3 of Lab 3, when you downloaded something, it gave you this M library that said documentation not ready. This is the stuff that will compile quite easily in Embed, but it will not work in MCU Expresso. So one of the things you have to do is Part 5 of Lab 3 had the one with classes. Now, if you want, you can always deal with something and say, oh, maybe I want this particular project to have classes, but it's got the other one that only works in Embed. So what you can do is you can actually right mouse click here, you can say delete and get rid of that library. And then what you can do is if you want the other library, the classes library, you can just say, oh, okay, let's just right mouse click here, go down to copy, and then go up to this project, and then paste it. It's very, very quick and easy to do. So you can switch libraries around for your own benefit, and there's the classes library there. So it's very easy to sort of work with these. This one you can export to MCU Expresso. When you say right mouse click, export program, make sure you choose not the default. If you use the default, it's going to give you errors. You have to go here and go down to MCU Expresso and select that before you export. Any exports will go into your downloads directory. And you better have MCU Expresso set up to actually use your downloads directory where you're going to import your stuff, or you'll get path errors. So that has to be set up properly as well. Some of the things that you have to worry about is installed SDKs. Now, I've got it showing up here, and I'm going to close this. So the only way you can usually see installed SDKs, you may see a bunch of stuff along the bottom here, but you have to go to Window, Show View, SDKs, installed SDKs. Now, typically when you first install MCU Expresso, it won't have this SDK, which you really need, okay? And the thing is that when you export something from Mbed to MCU Expresso, it has all the information about the Freedom K64 and all this kind of stuff, but if this isn't here, it won't be when you first install, nothing's going to work. You won't find the Freedom K64 in here by default. In available devices, pre-installed, whatever, it's not here unless you install it. So the thing that you have to do is, if you want to do that, you can click inside this window here, which is your CPP file, and you go to Projects down here, and you can go to Properties at the bottom, because it won't show up unless you click in there. And then on the second one here, you're going to open this up. You're going to go to MCU Settings, and if it doesn't show up in this list, which you won't the first time, you just click here, and it's going to automatically take you out to this thing where you're going to select your board, and out of all the boards, and you're going to have to log in, but you've already logged in to get MCU Expresso, so you should be able to just sign in. And then you're going to go to Boards. You're going to go to Kinetis, because it's a Kinetis board, and right at the bottom is your Freedom K64. You just click on this. You're going to say Build MCU Expresso SDK, and then it's going to say Loading, and when it's finished, you can slide down here and download it. Say I agree, and then you can go down here and you can say Save it, and you can say Save As, and put it in your Downloads directory, and then from your Downloads directory, once you've got it in your Downloads directory, you're just going to take it from your Downloads directory and drag and drop it right into here, just like you've done everything else. And then you have to actually get out of MCU Expresso, quit, and when you go back in, it will then be able to handle these kind of projects. And this will still be sitting here. Once you've got it in here, you can find your little blue button up here. There it is. Click on it. And sometimes if you've launched, now I've launched this a few times, so this is something else you're going to see. You can double click this again because it's already been launched at least once, and it's going to come up again, which is fine. And you double click it again, and away it goes. So if you've done this a couple of times like I've done, it won't ask you this the very first time, okay? So what it's going to do is it's going to do all this stuff. It's going to say 0 errors, 0 warnings, and then it's going to go target discovery. It's going to then put all this stuff right onto your board, and away you go. Now it may ask for DAP link or something like that and say, okay, but I've done this a few times and it didn't ask me for that particular thing. Now just to let you know, as I finish off here, sometimes DAP link does not work on here, and there's another way, and I can take you through that with Seger and stuff, some of those other things that have been downloaded. This is what Professor Scheffler was telling me the other day, that he basically uses MCU Expresso to do everything in his MCU 556 course. What we're using is we're using Mbed to do 99% of stuff, and when things don't work properly, what we do is export it to MCU Expresso, and now we can do things like step into and all this kind of stuff and step over. So if I go back here to restart, then right now I've got a yellow, for this particular one here, I've got a yellow LED lit up, and if I click on this, it's going to go from yellow to red and then turn off, because what you're doing here is it said red LED equals green LED equals 1 or something here, which means that it's basically just shutting them off. And red and green together make up yellow, and the first thing it's going to do is do this assignment, LED green equals 1, and that's going to shut off green LED rather, meaning the red LED shows up, and then they both go out because they've set both to 1. If you remember, a 1 shuts off the LED and a 0 turns it on. And the other thing is, before you delete, you should terminate the current session here. And then if you get rid of this, you can right mouse click, say delete, and over here, delete project contents, say OK, and then you can right mouse click again here, go down here to delete, delete project contents again, and then you can import other things. But here's the last thing I'm going to show you here. When you do the import, if there's any files in this list that have brackets in them, and these are your archive files you can see here, if any of them have bracket 1 or bracket 2, let's see, there it is. There's one there that will not work. It will not work. Why? Because it's got a bracket 2 around that and a bracket 1. These two will not work. So what you would do is delete these two and then take the brackets off this because it's the most current version before you try importing it into MCU Expresso, because MCU Expresso cannot handle file names that have parentheses like this. If you have MCU Expresso installed and you've installed the SDK for the Freedom K64, what I'm going to show you now is how to actually check out to make sure it's working properly. If we go to Window, Perspective, Reset Perspective, you should see this coming up, which is our MCU Expresso ID Quick Start panel. If it's here already, you don't have to do the Reset Perspective, but if it's not, you can do that. What we want to do is import SDK examples. And what we want to do is click on this because this is our Freedom K64. Then we're going to hit Next. And of these, we want to open up our demo apps. And out of all these demo apps, we want to do Hello World. And when we say Finish, it's going to populate our Hello World up here to the left and put all the stuff that we need in here. It's loading that up now. It's going to take a few seconds. And then we can launch it without even needing to use PuTTY because it's got its own console that we can check out just to make sure it's working. And if it's working here, it has to work everywhere. So here is our Hello World code here. And here's our main here where it's basically saying Hello World. And then inside the loop, it's going to basically grab a character from the keyboard and put it on the screen. So all we have to do at this point, because this is now in here, it's one of our standard ones that are built in. We can just hit our blue bug and we can select SimSysDAP and say OK. If this doesn't come up, then you've got a problem with the SimSysDAP. But if it comes up and it says OK, it should say 0 errors, 0 warnings because this is a demo app. It's going to do target discovery as long as your cable is connected to your board at this point. Everything's good. And at this point, it's ready to run. Now what we want to do is go to Terminal because this terminal here will show us what's coming up out of this program. So we're just going to hit the Run button and it's going to say Hello World, which it said up here. If we slide down, as you can see, it's waiting for us to type in a character. So I'm just going to go here and say, hi there, how are you? Question mark. And it's going to type back exactly that same string. So if you have this working, then you know there's no problem with MCU Expresso because your probes are working, the project that you've got in here will compile and download and run on your board. You can single step, you can do all these kinds of things with it. So MCU Expresso is not the problem. So this is one of the things that you should do before you say that MCU Expresso is not working properly.